After our family reunion, I checked my account. It was drained. $82,000 gone in a single night. My dad leaned back, smirking. We needed it more. My hands trembled as I reached for my bag. Then you won't mind what's coming next. They laughed, cruel and certain, right before a thunderous bang shook the house. The front door flew open, and in that moment, everything I thought I knew about family collapsed. My name is Micah, and this is the story of how my own parents tried to strip away not just my savings, but my dignity. It's a story about betrayal, justice, and what it truly means to choose your family. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story can reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if my story moves you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support means I can keep sharing stories like mine, stories that remind us we're never alone even when our own blood turns against us. By noon, the heat had turned the highway into a ribbon of glare, and I drove south from Denver with the AC on high, repeating the same line Dr. Ellis drilled into me like a lifeline: go with clear boundaries, no expectations, just observe. To my left, the Front Range cut the sky like a serrated blade. To my right, neighborhoods cloned themselves, cul-de-sacs with identical roofs, blue pools glinting behind privacy fences, lawns shaved to a golf green sheen. From a distance, it looked like order, like the version of America you sell in a brochure. Up close, it felt like something you could bruise a knuckle on. I told myself I wasn't here for reconciliation, and I wasn't here to be baited by nostalgia. I was here to show up, take the temperature, and go home. By the time I pulled up to my parents' place in Colorado Springs, the sun had baked the driveway into a skillet. The house didn't match the stories I'd heard for years: no more fraying carpet or drafty vents. Granite floors flashed under the entryway light. A modern electric fireplace sat where the old brick hearth used to be. Out back, the pool water held the sky like a secret. It was expensive in all the places that wanted to be seen. I stood there a second too long, cataloging tile grout and recessed lighting while the old question circled. If you're broke, why do you look like a catalog? Micah, my mother sang, arms wide, perfume sweet and high like a bell. My father appeared behind her in a pressed shirt he'd never wear to a dealership, smile just crooked enough to be read as charm. The backyard filled with cousins and uncles, paper plates sagging under potato salad smoke rising off the grill. Sage, my cousin, showed me a laptop that still wore its store stickers, turning it so the logo caught the light. Uncle Henry told anyone who'd listen about a beach rental and how the sunsets were almost fake, they were so perfect. My father leaned into me, low voice meant to pass as confidential, talking about a used car deal that fell into my lap and some freelance thing that was about to move. He made air quotes around move. My mother asked what my salary was now, did my agency give bonuses, what stocks I was into, how close I was to signing a lease for my own studio. She held her wine like a microphone and nodded as if each question was supportive instead of surgical. Rowan slipped to my side with a plate of chips and said, almost without moving his lips, "Something's off, man. They've been asking me all week what you make, what you save." I smiled like nothing in me was moving. The sun slid lower, turning the pool into a pane of molten glass. I told Rowan I was fine. I told myself I was just observing. At dinner, my mother set a glass of red by my plate. "I don't usually drink before driving back," I said, and she said I should stay the night, that it would be so nice, like old times. And besides, what was one glass? The first sip went down too sharp, a bitterness that sat at the back of my tongue and wouldn't leave. People laughed at a story Uncle Henry told. Sage tapped at new keys. My father raised his glass to family and held my eyes a beat too long. The room softened at the edges. Voices came from a tiny distance. I told myself to get water, to stand up, to say goodnight, and take the guest room lock for what it was worth. My legs felt both heavy and hollow. I remember the sound of someone's laughter lifting above the other's, light and satisfied, and the sight of my mother's hand tipping the bottle again, ruby liquid catching lamplight. Then the couch rose to meet me. The ceiling pulled away. The world thinned. I woke to a hush that comes only before sunrise, the kind of stillness that makes houses sound like they're breathing. A notification buzzed against the nightstand. I reached for my phone, eyes sandpapered, and blinked at the screen until the numbers got sharp. The balance reading didn't fit inside my head at first, like looking at your own name spelled wrong. Yesterday's total $82.09 was gone, replaced by $912. My scalp went cold. My chest stuttered once, twice. I scrolled and the lines of text stacked up with the same merciless rhythm: transfer, transfer, transfer. My thumb shook. I set the phone down, then picked it up again because a thing like that demands to be checked twice. My mouth tasted metallic. Sweat lifted on my arms. Inside the guest room, the air felt too thin to carry sound, but inside my head there was a roar. They did it again. They did it now, even now, after all the years and all the distance. They still think I'm a vein to tap. I pressed my palms flat to the nightstand and didn't move until the first bleached edge of morning crept across the floor. Chapter 2. Memory didn't come back in scenes so much as in flashes of sound, the sharp crack of ceramic when I was 7, standing in the hallway in pajamas while my father turned my spaceship piggy bank into rubble and said he'd pay me back double. The rattle of the pawn shop bell when I was 12, and the skateboard I saved for all spring disappeared behind a counter that smelled like dust and nickel. The dull thud of a floorboard when I was 16, hands shaking as I slid a shoebox into a cutout I'd made under my bed, only to find the lid crooked and the cash thinned a week later. What I hear most clearly is my mother's voice smoothing the edges. Your father just needs one lucky break. One break took a decade. At 18, I packed a duffel with 2 changes of clothes and the envelope I'd hidden since winter. I left Colorado Springs with $400 and a car that coughed up hills. In Denver, I made a home out of hours. I stacked shifts busboy at a Mexican place off Federal Evening Stock, at an art store in Rhino weekends, taking photos at apartment open houses for a leasing office. I learned how to sleep for 4 hours and show up like I'd slept 8. Community college felt like oxygen after a drought. I kept my GPA pinned at 3.9 because I was starving for proof that I could control something. In my last semester, Olivia at the agency looked at my spec ads like they were maps to a place she actually wanted to go. She made a call that became an internship that became a job, and I let myself buy a second-hand suit that didn't itch. Years spooled out. Titles changed. Denver became a city I knew by the way it smells after rain. I stayed small where it mattered, a tiny apartment, an old car with a stubborn check engine light lunches packed on my counter. Every bonus freelance check tax refund went into one place. $82,000 is not a fortune in a city with skylines climbing like weeds, but to me it was oxygen in a bottle labeled "open when free." It was a studio with white walls and bright windows where no one could gaslight my memory or rename my history. In the quiet guest room, the numbers on my phone kept returning to one fact: I didn't just lose money. I lost the years I used to clean the past off me. I swallowed and opened the banking app again. The timestamps lined up in a sick geometry: transfers between 2 and 4 in the morning, each authorization pushed through from my device. I followed the tiny link's device ID geolocation IP logs. The entries pointed back to this house like compass needles in a magnet storm. I stared until the screen dimmed. For a second, the old panic rose: if they set the terms, I will always be a step behind. Then the training kicked in, the kind I paid for in hours on a couch, and the humiliations you suffer when you finally admit the people who raised you can hurt you. I opened a notes app and wrote what I could feel leaving me if I didn't grab it: the taste of the wine, the exact dark cherry bitterness, the way my mother's hand hovered near my glass without asking, the angle of my father's smile as he toasted family, the way voices grew warm and far away, how my bag was not exactly where I remembered setting it, the way the skin on my thumb feels when pressed to glass. I took screenshots of every transaction, every push alert, every log line, then airdropped them to my laptop and backed them up to an external drive that lives in my backpack for a reason. I filmed the house in quick, steady passes. The granite floors, the new fireplace, the pool skimming under morning light, details I could lay next to years of texts from them about late bills and emergencies and how we're drowning here, son. I unzipped the side pocket of my bag and found my small notebook slightly out of place, the elastic band twisted as if it had been stretched and hurried back. I put it in the center of the bed and photographed it like evidence. Then I did the hardest part first. I called Nora. She answered on the second ring, voice as calm as a morning kitchen. I told her the numbers. She mentioned Nora said carefully that there was something big she was excited about. I didn't know what she meant. I wanted to be wrong. Silence pressed at the edges. "You're not wrong," I said, and I hated how hoarse I sounded. After Nora, I called Quinn. He didn't say "I told you so." He said if you argue, they'll gaslight you. If you file, the law speaks. He told me what to pull from the app, which screens to print, how to request the full access log, how to talk to the bank's fraud desk without letting them shunt me into a queue that would take all day. He said to get out of the house if I could do it without a scene. I was zipping my backpack when my phone vibrated with a new message from my mother. "We were only trying to protect you. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." I stared at the words, the insulation around them, the way protect bends to cover everything from a missed call to a theft. For a moment, I felt the child version of myself reach for a compromise that wouldn't even have a name, something gentle that turned into surrender as soon as you touched it. I put the phone face down. Dr. Ellis's voice moved through me, quiet as my own thought. You don't have to win by shouting. You win by choosing your boundary and keeping it. I slid the external drive into the inner pocket of my bag, checked for my wallet and keys, and stepped into the hallway. The house was still. The pool light flickered aqua across the kitchen ceiling. In the distance, a lawn sprinkler clacked like a metronome. I took one more slow look at the surfaces that wanted to be admired, and felt nothing but a clean, hard line draw itself under my feet. I was done being something they could open with a story. The morning after the reunion, I moved quietly through the guest room, every detail a possible piece of evidence. My backpack sat where I had left it, but the zipper on the side pocket was off by a fraction, the band around my small notebook stretched. I slid it out and turned the pages with careful fingers, noticing that the order of my notes wasn't the same. I placed it back down, photographed it, then opened the rest of my bag. Everything I touched felt touched by someone else. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through the log of transactions, and each line felt like another nail hammered into a wall I had spent years tearing down. I switched to video mode and walked the house as if I were documenting a crime scene, the granite floors gleaming under artificial light, the new fireplace that looked like it had been lifted from a showroom, the pool rippling under the early sun. I narrated softly under my breath, saying the date and time, then turned the camera on myself for a moment so no one could deny who was holding it. After that, I screen captured every notification, every line of the banking app, saved them twice, once to the phone and once to the external drive that rarely left my bag. The quiet of the house felt like a curtain stretched too tight, waiting to tear. When I called Nora, she answered quickly, like she had been waiting for the phone to ring. I didn't waste words. I told her the balance, the logs, the way the system showed my fingerprint at hours when I was unconscious. She sighed long, a sound full of both grief and inevitability. "Your mother mentioned something about a big amount she was expecting," she said. I didn't want to believe it. I pinched the bridge of my nose the same way I used to when homework and hunger piled up together at 16. Then I called Quinn. His voice was steady, almost clinical, the way someone sounds when they've walked people through this 100 times. "If you argue with them, you'll lose," he said. "They'll twist every word. If you file, the law will do the speaking. Start pulling the data. I'll help you line it up for the bank's fraud department." When I hung up, my phone buzzed again. A message from my mother lit the screen. "You know we did this to protect you. Don't make it bigger than it needs to be." My chest hollowed out. She hadn't denied it, not really. She'd dressed it in the same language she always used, the same soft cloth meant to cover a wound while she pressed deeper into it. My thumb hovered over the reply box, but I set the phone down instead. My decision crystallized, then hard and cold. That evening I met Nora and Quinn in a coffee shop in Rhino. The air smelled of roasted beans and sugar, the lights warm, the tables worn wood recycled from old factories. Quinn spread his laptop open and pulled up a list of instructions: how to download the full login history, how to preserve metadata so it couldn't be challenged, how to file the initial report with the sheriff's office. Nora handed me a manila envelope with old notes and receipts, proof of past times my parents had borrowed without asking. We leaned in close over the table, our voices low but urgent, as if we were plotting a rescue. My hand stayed on the strap of my backpack the entire time, gripping it the way a drowning man might grip a rope. By the time I stood to leave, my mind was no longer clouded. The decision was made. I walked out into the Denver night air, still hot from the day, and said silently to myself, if they think they can pull me back into the cycle, then I'll step into it on my terms with the law at my back. I am not the child clutching a broken piggy bank anymore. Back in my apartment, the glow of my computer screen threw a cold light against the walls. I sat hunched over, reviewing every screenshot, every log file, watching the hours between 2 and 4 a.m. repeat across the page. The weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me, but there was no other choice. I packed my external drive, a stack of printed transactions, and the notebook I had photographed earlier. The bag felt heavier than it should, as if the evidence itself carried its own gravity. The next morning, I met Nora and Quinn again. We chose the same coffee shop, the smell of burnt espresso beans clinging to the air. Quinn had already been on the phone with the sheriff's office. "We'll have a deputy ready," he said. "If they resist the freeze order, will be executed immediately." Nora placed her hand over mine. "They will say things meant to cut you down," she warned. "You have to stay steady. No yelling, no breaking, just facts." I nodded, though my pulse betrayed me, hammering against my ribs. When we pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, the sight of the pool shimmered like a mirage, unreal and taunting. I walked in first, Quinn close behind Nora to my side. Leonard was already in the living room, arms folded across his chest, chin tilted in defiance. Sylvia sat rigid on the couch, eyes sharp as if daring me to speak. My throat felt dry, but I set the stack of papers on the table. "Here are the banking logs," I said, my voice low but firm. "The transfers happened while I was asleep in this house." Leonard gave a short, contemptuous laugh. "Family needs come before your little projects. We needed it more than you." Sylvia leaned forward, her tone almost pleading but laced with blame. "We meant to tell you, Micah, but you've always been selfish. You never want to help." My hands trembled, but I steadied them against the strap of my bag. "If that's truly what you believe I said, then you won't mind what happens next." The words came out stronger than I expected. Leonard's eyes narrowed, his voice rising sharp enough to cut glass. "You dare turn on your own parents? You think you can shame us?" The air thickened heavy with a silence that buzzed in my ears. Then the pounding came. 3 hard blows against the front door rattled the frame. Bang! 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 Everyone froze. The ceiling fan hummed blades, cutting the silence. The deputy sheriff stepped in, badge catching the light miles beside him with a folder of papers. The deputy's voice carried through the room, steady and official. "We have an order to freeze the accounts of Leonard and Sylvia Stroud pending investigation of financial fraud." For a moment, no one moved. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's breath hitched, and the documents were placed on the table next to my stack. The scene felt suspended, as if the entire house had been holding its breath for years and finally let it go. Inside me, something shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the sun in their shadow. I was a man standing in the open with the law beside me. I exhaled slowly and thought, justice is finally in the room. The living room didn't empty when the deputy left. Instead, it swelled with voices, each one layered on the next, sharp and jagged. Uncle Henry was the first to break the silence. His voice cracked with anger as he jabbed a finger in my direction. "Micah, how could you bring the police into this house? We settle things as a family." The words clanged against the walls, echoing off the granite and glass. Sage, sitting in the corner with his brand-new laptop, stared at the floor for a long moment. His hands twitched over the keys as though he wanted to disappear behind the screen. Then without a word, he closed it, slid it back into the box, and pushed it across the carpet toward me. He couldn't meet my eyes, but the gesture spoke louder than any apology. Some of the other relatives muttered their sentences, short and heavy with accusation. Ungrateful. A son should protect his parents. How dare you shame your own blood? Their faces blurred into one chorus of disapproval, and for a moment the room felt smaller than it had ever been, the air heavy with judgment. Then Rowan arrived. He had driven all night from Idaho, exhaustion painted in the lines under his eyes, but his hand found my shoulder with a steady weight. "You're not alone," he said quietly. Words meant for me alone, though the whole room heard. His presence steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. For a heartbeat, I let myself believe I might stand through this storm. Sylvia's cry shattered that fragile balance. She collapsed into the couch with a sob that seemed rehearsed, yet raw. I only wanted to care for this family. She wailed, clutching at the hem of her dress as if she were tearing at the seams of her own guilt. "How could you do this to your mother?" My chest tightened, but the anger pushed back harder than the guilt. "You didn't care for the family," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "You took away the only dream I ever worked for." Her face twisted as though I had struck her, but I didn't look away. That night, when I thought the house might finally settle, another battlefield opened. Sylvia's words appeared online before I had even left Colorado Springs. "My son dragged the police into our home and branded us criminals," she wrote. "My heart is broken." The comments poured, and familiar names wrapped in unfamiliar cruelty. Old neighbors, distant cousins, people who had watched me grow up posted their verdicts. Kids these days have no respect. Parents give everything and get nothing back. The feed scrolled endlessly, and every sentence pushed me further into the corner. Then I saw the comment from Aunt Beatrice, my mother's sister and Nora's rival, in silence. "Micah, you have destroyed the family's honor." The words stung worse than the public pile-on because they carried the weight of blood and betrayal. I sat in a dim room, the glow of my laptop painting my face in shades of blue. The words blurred, but the weight of them didn't. Rowan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching me drown in silence until he finally spoke. "You did the right thing," he said. "But they'll paint you as the villain now. You need to be ready for that fight." I closed the screen and rubbed my temples. "If I do nothing, I lose everything I worked for," I told him. "If I fight, I may lose what's left of my family, and I don't even know if I still have a family to lose." The answer wasn't there in that room, but the resolve grew anyway. I booked a session with Dr. Ellis and promised Quinn I would push forward with the fraud case. The line had been drawn. They had chosen their side, and I would choose mine. My family by blood had aligned with lies and self-preservation. I would build a new one out of truth. Back in Denver, the city lights felt harsher than usual, as though the glass towers themselves were witnesses. I met Quinn in his office, stacks of documents spread across the table. We filed the complaint with the local court, and I watched as he delivered the folders with a precision that steadied me. The bank's fraud division confirmed what I had already known, but still needed to hear the logins matched my device, the geolocation tracked directly to my parents' house, and the biometric data confirmed the fingerprint scans. The facts were lined up like soldiers, and for the first time I felt a current of power flowing toward me instead of away. Still beneath that strength pulsed a loneliness that was almost unbearable. Winning against your parents doesn't feel like victory. It feels like exile, their lawyer countered swiftly. In a preliminary hearing, he raised his chin and declared, "These funds were a gift freely given from a son to his parents." The phrase rang through the courtroom with the weight of plausibility. Gifts are not theft. A son giving to his parents is tradition. My jaw tightened, but I held myself still. Quinn leaned close, whispering that it was a common tactic. I told myself it was also a desperate one. Sylvia doubled down on her performance online. Another post appeared. "My son gave us this money as a gift, but now he calls us criminals. How could he do this?" Screenshots found their way into my inbox from acquaintances and colleagues. Some messaged directly. "Is it true you pressed charges on your parents?" The questions carried more suspicion than support. Then one morning at work, my creative director pulled me aside. "There's chatter," he said, frowning. "The press is watching. Are you sure you can keep this under control?" My stomach lurched. The line between personal and professional had cracked. Sleep slipped away from me. My nights were haunted by the image of my father shattering the piggy bank in my childhood bedroom, coins scattering across the floor while his voice promised repayment that never came. I dragged myself to Dr. Ellis's office, the chair beneath me feeling heavier than ever. "I don't know if I'm still a son," I confessed, staring at the floor. I feel like I've traded that title for the role of enemy." He leaned forward, calm but firm. "You are still their son," he said, "but you are no longer their victim. Setting boundaries doesn't erase love. It redefines it. Sometimes it's the most honest act of care you can give yourself." His words carved a path through the fog, though the ache didn't vanish. At the next meeting of the financial abuse support group, a woman in her 60s shared her story. Her son had drained her pension account in 3 months. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but at the end she turned to me. "I only spoke up because I saw what you did," she said. "You gave me courage." Her gratitude hit me like a quiet wave. I had spent weeks feeling like an outcast, but here in this room, I was not alone. When I walked out into the night air, the streets humming with traffic, I drew a breath deeper than any I had taken in days. The fight was far from over. The gossip would grow louder, the court dates longer, the weight heavier. But if my story could pull someone else out of silence, then I could carry the burden a little longer. I straightened my shoulders and whispered to myself, "If my truth can help another person stand, then I'll take every hit they throw." I spent the afternoon turning my apartment into a war room. I printed every screenshot and log, laid them in order across my dining table, then read them aloud as if a judge were already watching. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and practiced the sentences the way Quinn taught me, short and clean, no extra adjectives to snag on. My hands wanted to shake, so I focused on my breath and the shape of my mouth around the facts. When Nora arrived, she carried a small tin of brownies that made the place smell like a Sunday kitchen. She set them down and put a steady hand on my shoulder. "You are not the kid whose skateboard was taken anymore," she said. "You are a man protecting himself." I let the words settle where the fear had been. After she left, I packed my brief stack into a folder, zipped my bag, and stood still long enough to feel my feet under me. The phone rang. My father's name lit the screen like a dare. I answered and listened to the soft whoosh of air through a vent on his end. "If you drop the complaint," he said, measured and low, "we can keep this quiet. No one needs to know." The hum of his AC filled the space where I might once have rushed to reassure him. I said nothing. Silence lengthened until it clicked into certainty. I ended the call without a word and set the phone face down. A minute later, Rowan knocked and stepped inside with a backpack and an apology for the mess that wasn't his. He sat at the table and watched the paper trail like it might start speaking. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, voice tight. "He told me that if he got the money from you, he'd buy land to open his own gambling spot. This wasn't a panic. It was a plan." The anger rose in me hard enough to sting my eyes, but I wrote the sentence down, dated it, and asked Rowan to repeat it while I recorded on my phone. Motive doesn't heal a wound, but it explains where the knife came from. When he left, the apartment returned to its usual quiet, a single lamp carving a cone of light over the table. I sat in it and let the old reel run, 7 years old in pajamas, the crash of ceramic, and the glitter of coins on carpet. 12 with a pawn ticket in my pocket and a hollow in my stomach. 16 prying up a floorboard and learning that even secrets have doors. I opened my eyes and looked at the folder on the table and knew this was different. I was no longer bargaining with a story that never paid me back. I had the law in my hands and the right to use it. Near midnight, the phone lit again. My mother's message scrolled across the lock screen. "Micah, I'm sorry. If you keep going, your father won't survive the humiliation. Don't do this to him." My fingers went numb. Shame has a way of dressing itself as love, of asking you to sign your name to your own erasure. I put the phone down and pressed my palms to the table until the tremor left them. Then I walked to the window and looked out at Denver's lights, pricking the dark like pins in a map. Tomorrow the truth would be spoken out loud. I drew in a long breath and reminded myself of the one fact no one could touch: I belonged to myself. The courthouse looked smaller up close, a squat red brick building that seemed to hold its breath under hard white lights. Inside, the fluorescent bulbs flattened every surface. The courtroom itself was narrow, the benches polished by years of waiting. I sat next to Quinn at the petitioner's table and tried not to look past him, but my eyes found them anyway. My father's mouth was set in a straight line. My mother's hands lay perfectly still, folded like a prayer she didn't believe in. When the clerk called our case, Quinn rose with a calm that felt borrowed from a cooler planet. He filed the exhibits in a clean stack, then walked the judge through the fax account activity between 2 and 4 in the morning biometric authorization from my device while I was documented as being